Illyra moved through the silent streets of Sarenthia, each footstep echoing against broken walls. Dust clung to her silver skin, and her green eyes, once bright with curiosity, now looked dull and empty. She remembered when the city had been full of song, laughter of children chasing glowing butterflies, music drifting from open windows. Only the wind sang, carrying memories she tried to forget. Every morning, she awoke beneath a sky heavy with ash, and every night she fell into restless sleep. Haunted by faces she could no longer comfort. She paused at the cracked fountain in the plaza where her family once gathered. The water had turned black, and the marble statues had crumbled. Illyra's heart tightened as images of her mother's gentle hands and her father's warm smile filled her mind. She shook her head, trying to chase the pain away, but it lingered in her chest like a stone. She had failed to protect them from the plague that swept across Sarenthia, and since their loss, she saw life only as a series of endings. Hope felt like a distant star she could never reach. Still, each day she went out, searching for something she could not name. She explored the shattered dwellings of her neighbors, listening for a sound of life, a cough, a whisper, a laugh. But the silence answered every plea. Sometimes she pressed her ear to a door and held her breath, wishing for a tiny spark of existence. When nothing came, she would step back, her shoulders slumping, and the emptiness would swallow her again. Yet she could not stay hidden forever. Somewhere beneath her despair, a small part of her still believed that the world might have more to offer. On this morning, she climbed the tall steps to her family's old observatory. The dome had split open, revealing the sky in jagged lines. She sat on the edge of the platform and stared upward, as if expecting an answer to arrive on the wind. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of something new, a question that softened her grief. What if she was not alone? She pressed her fingers to the cold metal rail, wondering if life could exist beyond Sarenthia's dying sun. As the violet dawn light spread across the horizon, she saw it, a tiny point of brightness descending slowly through the clouds. It looked nothing like the dull vessels she had heard about in old stories. This ship glowed with soft lights that pulsed like a heartbeat, and it moved with a steady purpose. Illyra held her breath, fear and wonder battling inside her. The vessel was a stranger in every sense. She knew that its arrival could mean danger or salvation. Her pulse quickened, and she rose to her feet. Every instinct told her to run, to hide among the ruins where no one could find her. But another urge, quieter but stronger, pulled her forward. She stepped down from the platform and ran toward the edge of the city, her bare feet kicking up ash. Her mind raced with questions. Who was out there? Why had they come? Could they help her find answers she had stopped seeking? Reaching a shattered archway, Illyra crouched behind a fallen column and watched as the ship settled into a crater of glass and rock. Plumes of violet smoke rose from its engines, and figures moved in the open ramp. A single being, taller than any Cerinthian, emerged. He paused, scanning the ruins with gentle caution. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, a moment, suspended in time. In his gaze, Illyra saw no hostility. Instead, she felt a warmth she had thought lost forever. Something deep inside her stirred, a fragile spark of hope that dared her to step out of the shadows. Illyra woke before dawn, her mind alive with the memory of the glowing ship. The ash-filled sky still held the violet glow of its engines as she crept along the ruined streets. Her heart pounded in her chest, equal parts fear and wonder. Wrapped her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders against the chill. Each step echoed on cracked stone, but she pressed on, drawn by a force she could not name. Today, she told herself, she would learn its secret. Crouching behind a shattered column near the crater, Illyra peered through the gaps at the stranger. He moved with careful grace, scanning the ruins for signs of life. His pale skin and dark hair shone under the ship's lights, and he wore simple clothes that seemed soft, nothing like the stiff, dusty suits of old explorers. In his hand, he carried a small device that hummed and glowed. Illyra had never seen such tools. Her breath caught as he knelt to touch a broken statue, tracing its lines with gentle fingers. She remembered the stories of alien invaders, ruthless beings who swept through worlds, leaving fire in their wake. Yet this human showed no weapon. Instead, he set down a small pod that hissed quietly, releasing a fine mist. Within moments, tiny plants sprouted from cracks in the ground, bright green shoots against the gray. Elira gasped. Life returned. In an instant, tears pricked at her eyes. Could this be hope? She pressed her palm to her chest, feeling a warmth spread beneath her ribs. As the stranger rose, he seemed to sense her presence. Elira froze, her fear clutching her throat. He paused and looked in her direction, his gaze soft and curious rather than accusing. He tilted his head as if offering friendship. Lyra's breath trembled. For months, she had hidden from every living being, believing that no one could help, that every soul was lost. Yet here stood someone who wanted to heal, not hurt her world. Gathering courage, Elira stepped forward, her bare feet crunching on glass shards. She saw the stranger hesitate, his hand rising in a gentle wave. At once, she remembered her father's teaching. Trust begins with a small kindness. She nodded slowly, and in that moment their silent promise formed. The human Marcus, she would learn his name soon, smiled and offered her a small vial of water. It glowed softly with a pale blue light. Elira accepted it with trembling fingers. The water tasted sweet and cold, a gift she had thought simple pleasures no longer existed. She drank deeply, feeling life flow through her. Marcus crouched beside her and pointed to the budding plants. Then he tapped his device, and a holographic map flickered between them, showing green dots spreading outward. He spoke in a gentle tone, but the words sounded strange. Still, Elira understood his meaning. He came to bring life back to Sarenthia. As the sun crested the violet clouds, warming the ruined city, Elira felt a shift within herself. The heavy weight of loss lifted slightly, replaced by a timid spark of purpose. She could not erase her grief, but she could channel it into helping this human restore her home. She looked into Marcus's eyes and offered him a nod of partnership. He returned it with a bright grin. Together, they stood by the new oasis of green shoots and watched as silver petals unfurled. Elira realized that this stranger's arrival was not just a chance encounter, it was the beginning of her journey. With Marcus's kindness guiding her and the promise of renewal at her feet, she dared to believe that Sarenthia's fate could change. And for the first time since her world fell silent, she allowed herself to hope. Elira woke to the soft hum of the life pods around the new oasis. The pale green shoots glowed in the dawn light as droplets of mist clung to their leaves. She sat beside Marcus, who was already studying his small holomap. It floated above, his palm showing bright dots where survivors might be hiding. Her heart pounded as she leaned forward, tracing the lines that led beyond the city walls. Today, they would begin their journey together, and she felt a hopeful tremor in her chest. They left the shattered plaza behind, stepping over broken stones and fallen statues. Each step reminded Elira of the voices she once knew. She paused. At a collapsed archway, where children had played, she closed her eyes and heard distant laughter, sharp and joyful. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she brushed it away. Marcus offered her a water vial and waited patiently. She drank, feeling warmth spread through her, and nodded. He smiled and motioned for her to guide the way. Elira led him through winding alleys that wound like veins through the ruins. She trusted him now, though his words were strange and his face unfamiliar. At a silent courtyard, Marcus stopped and placed a hand over his heart. Then he pointed at her and mimed speaking. Lara hesitated, then whispered the single word she remembered from old lessons. Sorry. He brightened and replied with slow syllables. She did not understand, but the tone felt friendly. Her lips curved into a small smile. They were learning each other's language one word at a time. As they climbed a steep ridge of broken rock, Elira told Marcus about her childhood. She spoke of violet sunsets and silver lakes that had dried long ago. Her voice trembled as she spoke of her lost sister, whose laughter once danced in the halls. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a simple touch, but it felt like a promise that she would never be alone again. Illyra drew in a deep breath and stood a little taller. 8. The path narrowed through a crumbling tunnel. Dust fell from above and every footstep echoed. Like a warning. Suddenly a portion of the ceiling gave way. Rocks tumbled toward Illyra. Marcus yanked her backward with surprising strength. They both stumbled out into a clearing. Illyra's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She looked at Marcus's determined face and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it made her chest ache. She realized then that trust was not just a word, but a bridge they were building together. Beyond the tunnel lay the great desert. Endless dunes of ash and stone stretched under the gray sky. Illyra shielded her eyes against the glare. But far off, she saw a flicker of movement, a faint glow where survivors might be gathering. Her breath caught in her throat. Could they be there? Marcus crouched beside her and tapped his holomap. The dot on his display matched what she saw on the horizon. She pointed and whispered Thurn. It meant found. Marcus's eyes shone and he extended his hand to her. As the sun climbed higher, they set a small camp among rocky outcrops. Marcus unpacked nutrient pods and shared them with Illyra. The bitter taste reminded her of childhood lessons about survival. Yet today, it felt like a gift. Lyra felt her sorrow soften. She looked at Marcus and saw not just a stranger, but a partner in her quest to heal the world. Together, they would find survivors and bring hope back to Sarenthia. And in that moment, Illyra believed that no fate was ever truly lost, so long as one heart dared to reach out to another. Illyra awoke before sunrise, the desert air cool against her skin. She and Marcus had camped among jagged rocks the night before, close enough to see the faint glow of fires on the horizon. Illyra pulled her cloak tighter and peered across the dunes, her heart fluttering with hope and fear. Survivors waited out their people who might have escaped the plague, people she could help. She brushed sand from her silver hair, feeling the weight of her past losses, but also the strength she had found in Marcus's kindness. Today she would lead him to her people and face the truth of what remained. They set out at first light, stepping carefully across ash-covered stones. Marcus followed closely, carrying his holomap and the small life pods that held seeds and water. Illyra guided him through a narrow canyon where wind had carved twisting patterns into rock walls. Each turn brought them closer to the camp, but also deeper into uncertainty. She remembered her sister's laughter in a place much like this, and her throat tightened. Marcus sensed her anxiety and offered a reassuring smile. She returned it, drawing courage from his steady presence. At the canyon's end, a ring of tents and makeshift shelters lay beside a dried-out riverbed. Flames flickered in shallow pits, casting warm light on weary faces. Illyra's heart squeezed. The survivors looked gaunt and wary, their eyes shining with hunger and distrust. A tall man stepped forward, clutching a crudely fashioned spear. He called out in harsh tones that Illyra barely understood. She raised her hands in a peaceful gesture, then spoke in her own tongue. The man's spear wavered, and he exchanged looks with the others. Hesitation flickered across their features. Marcus stepped forward and placed a life pod on the ground. It hissed softly, releasing cool mist that coaxed tiny green shoots from the sand. A child crept closer, wide-eyed, reaching out a trembling hand. Illyra watched as the man lowered his spear, his expression softening. The survivors gathered around, marveling at the sudden sprout of life. Illyra knelt beside Marcus and whispered hope. The word felt heavy on her tongue, but the relief in the survivors' eyes made every syllable worth it. They began to ask questions, their voices shaky but curious. Illyra stood and spoke of the plague, of the fall of her city, and of Marcus's promise to help restore life. She spoke in broken words and gestures, but her sincerity shone through. Tears glistened on her cheeks as she told of her family, of nights spent alone in silence. The survivors listened in hushed reverence. When she finished, the tall man stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. In that gesture, Illyra felt forgiveness for her past failures. She realized that her grief had become a bridge, connecting her to those who still believed. As the sun climbed, Illyra and Marcus distributed life pods and water vials to every survivor. Small green shoots emerged where despair had thrived. Children laughed as they touched the new plants, and adults allowed smiles to melt their weariness. Illyra felt her chest expand with pride and relief. She looked at Marcus, whose gentle eyes mirrored her joy. Together, they had transformed fear into trust and death into new beginnings. In that moment, Illyra understood that her fate and that of Saranthia had changed forever. The desert beneath the violet sky no longer felt empty, but full of possibility. Illyra rose with the first pale light, her heart fluttering like a butterfly freed from a jar. The small camp bustled around her, survivors tending fledgling plants. Children laughing as they chased glowing seedlings, elders exchanging hopeful glances. She paused at the edge of the circle, breathing in the crisp desert air that no longer smelled of ash and loss, but of promise. Beside her, Marcus packed the last of the life pods into his satchel. His gentle smile met her eyes, and she felt a swell of gratitude so deep it brought tears to her own. They set out toward the old river valley, where the greatest number of survivors was said to hide. Illyra led the way, each step lighter than it had been when she first stumbled through these dunes alone. The desert wind whispered around her, carrying echoes of her past, her sister's laughter, her mother's lullabies, but now those voices were not chains of sorrow, but reminders of why she fought for this new life. Marcus matched her pace. Silent but supportive, his presence a steady drumbeat in her heart. Halfway to the valley, they climbed a ridge of black stone. From the summit, Illyra could see smoke curling from distant caves, and she felt a tremor of apprehension. When the plague first spread, many had fled here believing these rocks would hide them. Now they might hide those who needed help most. She swallowed hard and exchanged a determined glance with Marcus. He nodded, as if saying, "We can do this." They descended into a narrow gorge where the survivors had formed a tight-knit community. At the entrance, a group of guards armed, with sharpened metal rods confronted them. Illyra's breath caught. Fear and doubt crept in. Memories of hiding passed through her mind like shadows. But she squared her shoulders and raised her hand in greeting. Marcus followed suit, offering a life pod that hissed and released a soothing mist. The guards hesitated, their stern expressions softening as green shoots sprouted at their feet. One guard, an older woman with silver-streaked hair, stepped forward and placed a wary hand on Illyra's arm. Illyra's heart thumped so loudly, she wondered if Marcus could hear it. Gathering courage, she spoke of hope and healing, her broken language mended by the simple truth in her eyes. The woman's grip tightened, and tears glistened as she nodded. Behind her, the other guards lowered their rods and guided Illyra and Marcus into the hidden settlement. Inside the cavern-like shelters, men and women peered from behind cloth curtains, their faces etched with fear and longing. Illyra felt overwhelmed by their silent questions. "Will you save us? Is there truly a future?" She knelt on the sandy floor, touching the smooth stones as if drawing strength from the earth itself. Marcus projected a soft hologram of Saranthia, rising green and vibrant once more. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the image showed rivers flowing and forests blooming. A child stepped forward and touched the light, turning to Illyra with bright, hopeful eyes. Illyra rose and addressed the gathered survivors. Her voice trembled at first, but grew firm as she spoke of rebirth and community. She described how each life pod, each seed, carried the spirit of her lost family, that by planting these seeds, they honored the past while building the future. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were tears of strength, not sorrow. The survivors joined her, voices lifting in a chorus of determined resolve. In that echoing cave, despair broke like glass, replaced by a shared heartbeat of hope. When they emerged back into the daylight, Illyra felt lighter than air. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Thank you." She smiled, the grief of her past transformed into a wellspring of compassion. Together, they watched as the survivors began planting life pods along the valley floor, bright green shoots pushing through the gray soil. The sun climbed higher, casting golden light over a world waking from its long sleep. As they walked back toward the oasis, Illyra realized that her fate was no longer defined by loss, but by love and renewal. In Marcus's gentle friendship, she had found purpose. In the survivor's trust, she had discovered strength. And in each sprouting seed, she saw the promise that even the smallest act of kindness could change the course of fate. Saranthia's future was no longer a distant dream. It was a living reality taking root beneath her feet. Illyra rose before the sun, her heart light with purpose. Round the oasis, small green shoots reached for the sky, and survivors moved among them, tending each new leaf. Today, she and Marcus would lead a group back to the heart of Saranthia's fallen city. Illyra inhaled the cool morning air and felt a quiet thrill. At her side, Marcus checked his holomap and smiled. For the first time in her life, she felt ready to face the ruins she once fled, armed with hope and the promise of renewal. They traveled in a loose line through the shifting sands. Survivors carried life pods and water vials, every face bright with expectation. When the distant spires of Saranthia's broken towers came into view, Illyra's chest tightened. Memories of loss welled up. Empty streets, silent statues, the plague's dark shadow. She closed her eyes and took Marcus's hand. His warmth grounded her, and she drew strength from his steady presence. She nodded to the group, and they all took a deep breath, stepping across the city's threshold together. Inside the Grand Plaza, where her family once gathered, ash still covered the cracked marble floor. Illyra paused by the ruined fountain, now dry and silent. She knelt and pressed her palm to the cold stone, remembering her mother's laughter echoing here. Tears stung her eyes, but she did not turn away. With Marcus's help, she placed a life pod at the fountain's base. It hissed and released a gentle mist that settled on the stone. Tiny green tendrils soon appeared, winding around her fingertips, soft and alive. As the survivors watched, Illyra guided them in placing pods at every shattered column and broken statue. Each pod brought a spark of green moss on marble, flowers among broken glass, vines climbing old walls. The city began to feel less like a tomb and more like a living place remembering its past. Illyra's footsteps grew lighter, and she found herself laughing softly at the wonder of it all. Marcus knelt beside her, his eyes warm, and together they watched life bloom where nothing had lived for years. They moved toward Illyra's family home next. The door lay twisted on its hinges, and inside, memories filled every corner. Alida touched the faded tapestry her sister had woven, its colors dull, but its pattern still proud. She knelt and planted a pod at its base. Within moments, vibrant threads of green began to weave around the tapestry's design, as if the wall itself remembered how to smile again. Illyra felt a gentle peace settle in her heart. For the first time, she believed that her family's story could continue here. Evening fell as survivors cleared rubble and watered the new plants. Children chased glowing seedlings under the violet sky, their laughter ringing through empty streets. Illyra walked with Marcus to the old observatory, its dome now half rebuilt with the help of the survivors' makeshift tools. She placed her hand on the metal rail, the same rail she once used to watch for strangers. Now she watched her people, free and alive, and felt a warmth bloom inside her chest. Marcus stood beside her, and they shared a quiet moment of triumph. Under the first stars of the night, Illyra spoke softly to the sky. She thanked her family for giving her the strength to lead, thanked Marcus for teaching her to trust again, and thanked the survivors for believing in a future they had never dared to imagine. Around them, Saranthia pulsed with new life. City of Despair had become a city of hope, and Illyra knew that as long as one spark of kindness burned in a human heart, no world was ever truly lost. Illyra woke to the soft glow of bioluminescent vines wrapping the observatory's walls. The city below her hummed with life, gentle footfalls as survivors tended to gardens. Children's laughter echoing through once silent corridors. She smiled, remembering how lonely these streets had been, how every corner bloomed with green and hope. She drew a deep breath, feeling the sweet scent of new flowers mixed with warm earth. Today marked a turning point, not just for Saranthia, but for herself. Marcus stood beside her, leaning on the restored railing. His eyes held both pride and sadness. He would soon return to Earth, leaving Illyra to guide her people through the next steps of rebuilding. She touched his arm and offered a gentle smile. In his quiet presence, she had found courage to face her pain, strength to trust again, and a purpose that grew with every seed she planted. Now she felt ready to lead alone, but her heart would always hold gratitude for this human who believed. In her, below them, villagers gathered by the central plaza, where a circle of glowing flowers formed a living mosaic. Illyra stepped forward and lifted her voice clear and steady. She spoke of unity, of standing together in times of fear, and of nurturing the world until it thrived again. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of all she had endured, and all she had learned. The crowd listened in hushed awe, then broke into applause that rippled like waves across the stone floor. A young girl with silver hair pressed forward and handed Illyra a small braided bracelet made of living vines. Each strand glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of the city's renewed heartbeat. Illyra accepted it with tears in her eyes, slipping it around her wrist. It symbolized the bond between her people and the land they had nearly lost. She clasped the girl's hand and bowed her head, promising that Sarenthia would flourish under her care. As the sun set in a blaze of violet and gold, Marcus approached Illyra one last time. He held a small metal cylinder, the recorder containing images and data of Sarenthia's revival. He planned to share their story with his world, so other dying planets might learn and heal. Illyra's chest tightened with emotion. She pressed her palm to his arm and whispered thanks in her broken, yet heartfelt speech. Marcus nodded, understanding every meaning carried in her tone. They spent the final hour walking through the reborn city. Illyra showed him rooftop gardens where vines curled around ancient statues, and schools where children learned to grow food and medicine. She introduced him to friends who once hid in caves, now tending bright fields of crops. Everywhere they went, Illyra felt pride and joy swell within her. Sarenthia was no longer a world of despair, but a beacon of renewal, proof that even the deepest wounds could bloom into life. At the edge of the landing field, the ship awaited its departure. Lyra placed a hand on its smooth hull, feeling the faint vibrations of its engines. He held her gently, his body warm and real. At that moment, she was neither alien nor lost. She was simply herself, loved and valued. When they finally stepped apart, she gave him a radiant smile and whispered, "Go well, my friend." His eyes glistened as he nodded and boarded the ship. As the engines hummed to life, Marcus waved through the glass viewport. Illyra raised her hand until the ship lifted off and disappeared into the sky. She stood alone on the landing pad, but instead of emptiness, she felt a full heart. Turning back, she saw her people waiting, their faces bright with hope. Illyra lifted her chin, her green eyes shining with purpose. She walked toward them, ready to lead Sarenthia into its new dawn. And in every breath of wind, every sprouting leaf, she carried the promise of a future born from kindness and courage.